This observation is one I suspect that no one will agree with, but I'll propose it anyway. I think the U.S. needs to reinstate a military draft. Specifically, we should draft about 8,000 a year through a lottery with no deferments, all for 2-year enlistments. And everyone drafted should be assigned to a unit that would deploy if we go to war. To me, there are a number of reasons why we should do this. With the all-volunteer force, the gap between the military and society has grown to an unacceptable level. On the plus side, the military is representative of the demographic diversity of our country. It's the most integrated entity in the U.S. The only time in my life that I actually lived in truly integrated neighborhoods was when I lived on a base in Army housing. But the military doesn't fully reflect the economic diversity of the nation. Most recruits come from middle class and lower middle class households, with incomes ranging from about $40,000 up to maybe $85,000. The part of the country that lives at 2 to 3 times the median household income, are those in the top 20% of income. And frankly, those in the decision-making positions in the U.S. are underrepresented in the military. There were some exceptions, like Pat Tillman, who gave up a huge career to serve, and to me is a real hero in every sense of the word. And there were some others who, after 9/11, volunteered. But in general terms, the guys wearing body armor in 100-degree temperature carrying a light machine gun on their 3rd deployment weren't from the top 20% income level. They were middle to lower middle class Americans. And to me, as a result of the gap between the military and society, and the fact that only a small segment of the nation participates and bears the cost, I think we've made going to war too easy. At times, an immediate crisis may require a president to act militarily right now, as a preemptive attack or in response to attack. And every president should have, that immediate authority. But the decision to commit the nation to a sustained conflict that will be costly in terms of lives and money needs to be more deliberate, to include defining the specific goals and the amount of sacrifice the nation is willing to accept. This is really hard. It's harder than it sounds. The only time we actually successfully did this was World War II, and when the U.S. and the British clearly defined victory, and everybody bought into the sacrifice required to achieve it. But World War II was unique in ways that we'll never experience again. In Korea, Vietnam, and the most recent conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, we never reached that level of clarity. But as we move forward in a time where we face serious threats, especially from China, I think we need a forcing function that will drive us to think more deliberately when we go to war, how we'll fight it, what we want to achieve, and what level of sacrifice we expect. During the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Army had a policy where a general officer attended the funeral of every soldier killed in the conflicts, and I participated in a number of those. The responsibilities included presenting the folded U.S. flag to a family member at the end of the ceremony. For me, those may have been the most important and the most difficult things I did in the Army. They all had a huge impact on me. And one in particular in a small town in Texas really did. During the service, the church was packed. Several hundred people stood outside. When the vehicles drove to the cemetery, at least 1,000 people lined the streets, all holding small American flags. It was the same at the cemetery, a large group, all holding flags. The sense of loss was palpable, you could feel it in the air. Later that night, I was back home. I watched a reality TV show, and a talk show with seemingly crazy people screaming at each other about politics. And it suddenly hit me that we had devised 2 worlds that isolated the cost of the wars. On the one hand, there was this community that experienced this deep sense of collective loss. And then there was the rest of the nation that was largely oblivious to it all. Here was a young man who felt his nation was worth defending, and he gave his life. But for much of the country, his actions were on the periphery of what was relevant to their day-to-day lives. We'll face future wars that we have to fight, but we need to ensure that the full nation is committed and we don't do this again.